Okay, this is a mixing demo for my glass object painting. I will be painting a glass cup of coffee with a kind of golden background. So those are the colors I'll be mixing. If you are working from the same photo references, you can follow along with this mixing demo. Obviously, if you are setting up your own still life at home and you have a different set of colors, then mix according to those colors. If you are new to my class, if you haven't taken my beginning section before and are new intermediate to me, I want you to know that I want to get you in the practice, if you're not already in the practice, of mixing your colors out on your palette beforehand. So pre-mixing a set of value strains, so different values of whatever colors you are working with. So for me, I'm looking at my still life. I see there's obviously the gold, there's the brown of the coffee, and there's also some grays. So I'm looking at those colors, and I have my colors laid out at the top of my palette up here, and I can start to assess how I can start to mix out those different colors and the different values of those colors. Now, part of why I do this is that when I then go to paint, if I have my values and my colors already kind of laid out, it gives me some freedom with my painting, where I don't have to be thinking with sort of every single stroke of going back and mixing that new value and color that I need. So it gives me a nice kind of foundation that you can then sort of improv off of. So it's actually, while this can sometimes feel a little tedious, it's actually quite freeing to do. So I'm going to begin with more of a warmer gray. I'm going to mix that using this transparent iron oxide. If you don't have that, you probably have a burnt umber. Burnt umber will also work in the same way as this transparent iron oxide, and this ultramarine blue. And I just want to point out, as we're mixing, we're also thinking of our color theory, thinking of the color wheel. If I want to make a gray, if I want to make a neutral, you can do that combining different complementaries. And this transparent iron oxide is kind of acting like an orange combined with blue, complementary color combination. It's going to give you some different grays and neutrals to work with. So I want it to be a bit warmer, so I'm going to have it be leaning more towards the transparent iron oxide. Okay, and I'm just going to mix a value strain of these warm grays to start, because I know that I'll need that in parts of my cup. I'll also, once I mix this out, next to it I can mix some browns for my coffee. And I'll probably be using both of those for the to address the coffee. So transparent iron oxide. As I'm mixing, I'm wiping off my palette knife so I'm not contaminating the kind of original source of the paint. Okay. So we're trying to build sort of best practices with our mixing. I really try to do that because I am quite a messy painter, so I kind of have to wrangle myself a bit. But if I do wrangle myself a bit as I'm mixing, it can pay off in the painting. So we're trying here to be strategic in the way that we're mixing. That's why we're going to mix out these whole value scales and have them ready. Okay. And also trying to contain that a little bit. Okay, and we're also being strategic in how we're mixing out the paint, so I'm not going to just take this gray and go directly into the yellow and contaminate that entire pile, right? So we want to keep in mind that oil paint can be quite expensive, so if you can be a little bit more strategic in the ways that you're mixing out your colors, that can also save you some paint, which is nice. Okay, I can tell I want this to go a little bit warmer, so before I go to that transparent iron oxide, wiping off my palette knife, more here. Okay. Now, when it is such a dark combination, it can be hard to tell what the temperature is really looking like, right? Because the value is so dark, it's hard to tell if it's leaning warmer or cooler. So when we start to add a bit of white into this, we'll be able to really see what the temperature of this neutral, what that's looking like. Okay, you can also kind of see when you scrape it. You scrape it down, you're looking here, you're seeing it more kind of flattened and scraped out. You can kind of see the temperature a little bit better. But once we add some white, we'll be able to really see how warm it is leaning. Okay, so I'm going to start to give myself some steps going down, mixing out this scale. Okay. And I'm actually going to begin by mixing more of a kind of mid-tone, and then give myself a few steps going up and a little bit less each time. Okay, and then same thing on the other side. So a bit less, a little bit less. Okay. So when I'm mixing my value scale like this, what I like to do is start by mixing that really dark neutral, then I mix a kind of mid-tone gray, and I use that gray to mix out the values on the other side. So that's another strategy where I'm sort of thinking, okay, how can I make these steps? Well, you don't have to try to mix everything directly from this neutral, which is kind of like a black and white. That can be very difficult to get those nuanced steps. So instead, you can start by mixing that gray, and then you've put out these other little steps going in both directions, where it has a little bit less and a little bit less going each way, right? So you're gonna know that. Oh wait, I might have done it the wrong way. That's fine. Okay, muttering to myself. Anyway, here is our mid-tone gray. Okay. Okay, I am realizing I did kind of a dorky thing over here. Ignore this part of my value scale. Because what I actually want to do is I'm going to take this, just put it right there, and I'm actually going to take some of this gray, put it right there. I'm going to take a much bigger lump of white, put it into here. Okay. So I have this very light gray that is quite close to a pure white. I have some of my mid-tone gray from that pile that I mixed. I'm going to take some of this and mix that into this next step and kind of get something in between. Okay. So I'm using the other part of my scale to mix these steps rather than trying to mix every single step from a black and a white, which can be really difficult to pull off. So now you'll see what that looks like going the other direction with these other little piles. So I'm going to grab some more of this mid-tone gray. Okay. And I'm going to take that, mix it into this pile. Probably need a little bit more so it's not such a severe step, but let's also make sure we're fully mixing it. So I'm pressing my palette knife through, scraping it up. You want to try to really make sure that your little piles of paint are fully mixed, so that when you're going to paint, you don't accidentally have a surprise of a much darker or much lighter value coming out than you anticipated. Okay, grabbing a little bit more of these grays. Let's put that just a little bit lighter. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now, again, I'm gonna grab some of what I just mixed and I'm gonna put it into this other little pile there. Let's grab a little bit more of this dark neutral. So this mixing strategy, we're using other parts of the scale to mix out these individual steps. Gives you a nice foundation, and then you can start to look and see maybe what steps you need to adjust a little bit. So this last one, for example, still looks very close to that, but it's a huge step away from here. So we need more of that dark neutral in there. So let's grab a lump of that, mix that in there. Okay, maybe even a little bit more. Okay, a little bit more. All right, that looks much better. Okay, so let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. That's pretty good. If as I'm painting I'm realizing that I need more values, I can mix out a little bit more, but this gives me a nice foundation to work off of. Okay, so that I'll be using for parts of my cup where I'm noticing it's going towards a warm gray. I also want to mix some different values for the coffee. So, and I want to mix the yellows for the cloth. I'm going to do the yellows now because some of those yellows can actually also be used for the coffee. So, I have my yellow, and in order to get the darker values for the yellow, I need to neutralize it in the shadow areas. And to create a neutral, one option is that you can combine complementary colors. So the complement to yellow is purple, and I'm actually going to make a nice, one of my favorite sort of neutralized purplish colors, which is alizarin crimson and phthalo green. And I'm going to push it a little bit warmer, so a little bit more alizarin crimson. This is one of my favorite neutrals of all time. Going both cool and warm, it makes such a beautiful color. Okay, so, and that goes very, very dark. I'm going to add a little bit of white down here just to show you kind of what that color really looks like. Okay, so it's a nice, beautiful, neutral purple. Yes. Okay, so this will be really useful to add to some of our yellows. Okay, so I'm going to grab some of this yellow ochre. The cloth is already very similar to yellow ochre. Okay, so the local color is when you're shining a light on an object and you're seeing what the kind of true color of that object is. The local color of my cloth is already quite close to yellow ochre. Maybe it goes a little bit brighter, so I can brighten it and lighten it with a little bit of cadmium yellow and then also a little bit of white, but I don't want to overwhelm it with white, because white will cool the color down. It has a cooling effect. Yellow is a warm color. If I overwhelm it with white, it's going to start to look too cool and pastel-y and maybe not like the color that I really want it to be going for. Anyway, so let's grab some of this purple. Okay, we're gonna put it down here. All right, and we're going to make some steps. So I'm gonna put some yellow ochre down, a little bit less right there. Okay, so let's start here, see what that looks like. Now, when you're getting the shadows, you're neutralizing your color, sometimes when you're first seeing what that neutralized version of a color looks like, it can look kind of weird if you're not used to mixing out value strains like this, because well, what happens when you neutralize the color is that it's going towards brown or gray, and part of your brain might be like, oh no, this doesn't look like yellow anymore, it's not, this can't be right. But if you really look at your painting subject and you look at those shadows, you kind of isolate yourself from the knowledge of, oh, this is yellow, but you really just look at those shadows, you start to realize, actually, yeah, they do kind of look like that, right? But I'm not even used to sort of seeing it that way. Okay, so that is probably dark enough. We could probably have maybe one step lighter, or maybe one step darker. But I think this is okay. Well, let's do one more. So I need to mix out a little bit more purple. And I barely have any crimson on my palette because I was looking at this and going, oh, I don't need any red. Well, you kind of do. This is a lesson in just putting out your full palette, even sometimes when you think you don't, because it gives you options. Okay. Wayne Thiebaud had this really interesting thing that he has said in some interviews of putting out the full palette is kind of like having all of the keys on your piano, right? And then you have all these options. Okay, there we go. So if I need something much darker, now I have that option. Okay, now I'm going to use some of what I just mixed to make the next step here. Okay. So I'm giving myself some different values of yellow to use for this painting. Okay, same thing again, taking what I've just mixed, mixing it into that next pile. Alright, now let's mix some lighter versions of our yellow. So like I said before, white can have a really cooling effect, which you just need to be aware of and a little wary of when you're using a warm color, because that can overwhelm and make the color change and feel like it's not really the color that you're going for. So with warmer colors, you can use a bright yellow like a cadmium yellow, or you can even use a yellow ochre depending on the color, but you can use yellows to lighten and brighten a color but keep it warm. So we're going to add some cadmium yellow here, see what that looks like. Okay, so the cadmium yellow is brightening it up. Let's do one more little pile with more cadmium yellow. Okay, so we're getting a nice set of values to address all those different transitions in values that I'm seeing in the folds of the fabric. Okay. Alright, and I'm going to add a little bit of titanium white to this last pile here. So it does go a little bit cooler in the brighter areas. Okay, so that is probably good. There are some areas of kind of more intense highlights, so maybe I'll do one last little pile right there. Add a bunch of white to it. Okay. So that puts us in a good position to address the cloth there. You can see I already need more paper towels. But I think I'm good for the rest of this demo. I'll get more paper towels before I paint. Alright, last but not least, well actually also I'm looking at my grays and I'm looking at my cup. I'm realizing I do need a much more intense light at the end because with a glass object you're dealing with some very intense, sharp, bright highlights. That is part of the nature of capturing glass in a painting, is that awareness of how the values are acting, which is that the highlights in particular go very intense, they can go very sharp. So one more brighter value to address those bright highlights. Okay, coffee, my favorite. Okay, I'm gonna grab some of this neutral that we've mixed out, and there's really only a few values of the coffee that I'm seeing, so I'm just gonna mix out a little kind of mini value stream. And as I'm painting, if I need to mix more, I can always do that. Okay, so, and let's get a little bit more here. We'll add a little bit more of this ultramarine blue. Okay. So even that coffee is just a variation on the ultramarine blue transparent iron oxide combination, and again that could also be ultramarine blue or burnt umber. Okay. And then I have milky coffee here that I'm dealing with, so adding white. Adding white is going to give me that milky effect. And adding white, totally fine here because it's milky. That's the thing about adding white, it's going to make something look milky. So you want to make sure that's what you're going for. Okay, and I also might actually add some yellow ochre into some of the lighter portions of the coffee too. I'll help warm it up a little bit. Okay, so let's test out what this brown looks like. It's a little hard to see right now because it's so dark. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that will work. Okay. And I have some kind of foam on top of my coffee, and the foam goes quite yellow, like a warm yellow, like our yellow ochre. So I'm going to grab some of what I was just mixing for the lighter coffees, and I'm also going to grab some of the yellows and some of these lighter yellows, add that into here. Okay, so that can be for my coffee foam. Right, let's mix up this value scale. So I'm grabbing some of this light. Now you'll see over here I have a bunch of paint skins from old paint. I like to save those to put into weird crusty paintings, which you're probably not making weird crusty paintings, so don't do that unless you want to save them. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more of the yellow ochre into this one too to warm it up a little bit. think I want to darken that a little bit, so I'm going to actually just take a little bit of what I've just mixed. Yeah, that's more of the value that I need, that I see in my still life. Okay, and I have one more transition value, scraping up some of what I've just mixed, mixing it into that next step. Alright. Okay, looks good. And if I need more of these values later, I still have quite a bit of that original and neutral, so I can use that to remix stuff. Okay, so major values addressed. Yellows of the cloth, grays for the cup, browns, and kind of yellow browns for the coffee. So we're good to go. I now have this foundation with these different colors and values being addressed, and that's going to make it so that when I go to paint, I don't have to think about mixing color for every single brush stroke. Rather, I've given myself this foundation that then allows me to paint a little bit more freely. So I encourage you to also pre-mix your values and colors. And as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out.